All right, guys, welcome back to the CardsHQ Podcast. As you can hear from the music in the background, we are located in a nightclub. I think I make that joke every week, either a DJ joke or a nightclub joke, and I always think it's funny, and so I just assume everyone else does, and I know that I'm wrong. You know what happens when we assume. But hey, it's National Hug a News Person Day, so don't get mad at me for my terrible jokes. I got a good one for you. If you guys are familiar with Murphy's Law, I saw this the other day. Yeah, of course, everybody knows what Murphy's Law is. You know, when anything could possibly go wrong to make things worse for you, it does. Well, have you heard of Cole's Law? Cole's Law. Yeah, it's thinly sliced cabbage that usually has mayo in it. Okay, everybody who is listening or was planning to listen to this podcast, if you are still with me, from the bottom of my heart, thank you after putting up with the first 60 to 90 seconds of this debacle. But this is going to be a one-man effort today, one-man, one-dog effort. We'll see if Lily the Aussie Doodle has anything to say. She's violently shaking over here while she's sleeping. She must be having a ferocious dream chasing bunny rabbits through St. Matthews or something. But anyway, this is serving as sort of a season in review episode after I'm not even going to say last week was we were on hiatus after last week. I'm going to say we were in hibernation. I was in Memphis 2 weekends ago, and then this past week I was not around at all, just trying to catch up on everything. And you know, this is when all the roster stuff changes, and you know, all sorts of different things are going on with the NBA draft while the tournament is winding down, and now things will really kick into high gear. Although a lot of the coaching stuff and things like that those things have already transpired. So we'll see what happens with Louisville. This actually, for me, just, you know, thinking about this, you know, here in the last couple days, and of course I'm going to jinx myself, but relatively speaking, in terms of personnel and, you know, goings on, so to speak, with assistant coaches and all sorts of different stuff, will be a pretty low key. It seems to be a pretty bound to be a pretty low key off season, in the sense that I don't anticipate any transfers. I feel like we would have heard about them by now. I do think that you know, obviously it'll be a little while before we know what Donovan Mitchell decides to do. I do think that it's fairly certain that, well, I'll never say certain, but it's fairly likely that that Deng Adel and Jalen Johnson come back to college. Johnson for his senior year, Deng Adel for his junior year. And so the most intriguing thing with Louisville as far as personnel goes is Donovan Mitchell and what his next step is, and then what Louisville's contingency plan is. I know what it is. I'm hoping to write about it. And here in the coming days and weeks, but his decision, Mitchell's decision, will obviously be the biggest difference, I think, between how Louisville is perceived as a, you know, top 10, top 8, top 10 team. Some are a little more bullish on Louisville. And if Mitchell comes back, I actually think Louisville will end up being one of probably the top 2 or 3 teams in every preseason poll that we see as the season approaches. So a lot could change over the next couple months based entirely on Donovan Mitchell. But what we do know about Louisville for next year, they've got a top 10 recruiting class. We expect Quentin Snyder to be back, obviously, at point guard, and quite a few other guys, VJ King, like I said, Deng Adel and Jalen Johnson. So if Donovan Mitchell were to leave, I would expect VJ King to just slide in, and Louisville would have a good-sized perimeter on either wing with Adele and King, assuming both are, assuming Adele comes back, obviously. And then, you know, I'm waiting to see, I'm curious to see if Ray Spalding makes a junior year leap. and what kind of progress Jalen Johnson and Honest Mahmoud make. We've heard rumblings that Mats Stockman will redshirt this coming year. He seems open to that, just so they can get him a chance to play in 2018-19. We'll see if that happens. Obviously, you don't have to officially take a red shirt for months and months and months, I don't believe. So it could be a while with that. And then, of course, how does the recruiting class come in? How do guys like Lance Thomas and Jordan Nwora, Darius Perry, and, of course, Malik Williams, how do those guys step in and partake in this team and help them be as good as a lot of people think they can be? That is a big, big question. But we're talking about 4 guys who I look at, especially Malik Williams and Darius Perry, but Thomas and Nwora aren't all that far behind, guys who can come in and play right away. Nwora is a guy who has done a prep year, so his body, he's physically ready. Mentally, emotionally, maturity-wise, this kid is ready to play. He's a shooter. He'll help them a lot. I really believe that. Lance Thomas is a really intriguing, versatile kid who could definitely be a factor in the press. He's long and athletic, and he's a streaky scorer. But if he can keep improving, I think he could be a key guy for them. But Perry is super athletic, a very good defender, and that's why he's got the tools to be a very good defender. So that's why I think he'll see a lot of time backing up Quentin Snyder and whoever is playing the 2-guard spot. And then Malik Williams, I think, is a candidate to start. I mean, I think he's that good. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this roster shakes out. So let's scale back here. Just first and foremost, I always say this every podcast. The bottom line is this is an extremely easy podcast to find. If you like listening to good interviews, I like to think that they're good interviews with various sports writers or people around college basketball. We've talked to Damian Lee, Dick Vitale talked a little bit about Ryan McMahon. We've had Pat Forty and Luke Wynn, Mike DeCourcy, Mike Rutherford here locally came on once. We've had all sorts of good guests. Even went off the beaten path a little bit and talked to the Dallas Mavericks free throw coach, the only guy in the NBA who is specifically a free throw coach when Louisville was having his free throw problems. At least to him, technically right now is when Louisville should be getting its work in on its free throw shooting. Can't fix it during the season, he says. So if they're going to alter mechanics and all that stuff, maybe that's what they're working on now. But anyway, we're going to try to keep doing these podcasts every week throughout the rest of the year. Obviously, we'll transition more to football in the summertime as football nears. We'll talk some baseball, but obviously also we'll be covering the recruiting trail quite significantly. I go to typically anywhere from 2 to 5 recruiting events each summer, and obviously make a lot of phone calls and all that stuff. So we'll try to keep you informed in that. We'll try to line up some recruiting experts as guests this summer to kind of take you through Louisville's class. The 2018 class already has 2 guys in. Courtney Ramey from near St. Louis, who I believe was just named the St. Louis Post-Dispatch Player of the Year as a junior. He's a rising senior. The 2018 kids will be rising seniors. They've already got pledges from Ramey, who's about a 6'3", 170-pound point guard who is, they're very excited about him coming in and the impact that he'll be able to have. And then, how he becomes, how he develops is a big thing, because he'll be the guy who I would assume would take over the reins for Quentin Snyder and play alongside Darius Perry for Louisville here in the near future, 2 seasons from now as an incoming freshman. And then also Anthony Simons, who is another 6'3", about 170-pound combo guard who can score. That's quite a dynamic duo between those 2 guys. So potentially a very, very good recruiting class for Louisville, and those two guys give them a good start. So anyway, so we'll do a lot of recruiting stuff, and throughout mostly June and July, I would think, and August, and then, like I said, we'll start getting more into football. And I think Steve Jones will be taking over the podcast, doing as much or as little as he would like with it when it comes down to August and into football season. So there are so many different ways you can find this podcast. Like I said, download the CardsHQ app. We've got the podcast tab is in there. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on SoundCloud by searching CardsHQ. There's just so many different ways. I also always put this on courierjournal.com. You can usually find it in the U of L or the main sports page or the U of L specific sports page. But it's accessible. There's no reason to not subscribe to it at this point, and it means a lot to me. I get to tell my mom that people actually listen to a podcast that I do, and you know how important it is for moms to think that their kids are even remotely contributing to society. I would argue that I'm not really contributing to society, but at least we're putting out content for people, #content. Anyway, so the rest of this podcast, we'll try to get to a bunch of different things. Like I said, I want to do a year in review. I would mostly like to just kind of talk about the Final Four real quick, and then I want to get to kind of the topic du jour, which is officiating in college basketball. And then we'll also get into, I did a way too early ACC power ranking, something just slightly different than what a lot of people are doing, top 25s. National people are doing those. I went to the ACC side of things to do it because, that's Louisville fans love hearing about the ACC and how they line up against their primary rivals. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule in there too. And then we will talk about those top 25s. The Vegas odds started leaking out last night. I saw RJ in Vegas tweet his out. I think those were, I don't want to tell you where they were from. I don't want to get it wrong, but I will cite that. I'll cite that when we get to it. And then, like I said, we'll talk lastly a little bit more about recruiting in the NBA draft. So let's start with the national championship game and the Final Four. First of all, I feel like so many Final Fours have been not that entertaining as far as good basketball goes. Just in the last couple years. I mean, Oklahoma got drilled last year in their game. And I just don't remember the Final Four being all that entertaining last year. The Saturday games of the Final Four. Kentucky-Wisconsin was a good game in 2015. It was an entertaining game, but Duke crushed Michigan State. Kentucky-Wisconsin the year before was an entertaining game. If I recall, Florida-UConn was pretty decent too. Obviously, Louisville-Wichita State was a hotly contested, entertaining game in 2013. So there have been a fair amount of good Final Four games. So I'm not going to sit here and act like every single Saturday of the Final Four is just no fun. But I will say that, it just seems like typically, and this is a feel thing, that the Saturday of the Final Four doesn't always live up to the first couple weekends of the tournament, and that's fine. I mean, that's the first couple weekends of the tournament are when, especially that first weekend, is when it's really exciting and there are upsets, and then the second weekend there's a lot of really good games where a lot of these fringe top 25 teams show that when they play really, really well, that they're not all that different than the teams in the top 10. I mean, you always hear about people complaining about parity and all this other stuff in college football. Well, college basketball doesn't have that problem. When you have, one seeds needing overtime to beat an 8 seed, or, this is a, it's really, to me, a show in the first weekend and second weekend, especially the second, usually Sweet 16, a show of the parity that college basketball has. How, there's a lot of good basketball players, and you need to account for that when this tournament starts, because there's going to be a lot of good games and there's going to be a lot of entertainment. But when I get to the Final Four, usually there's one team that's crashed the party. This year is South Carolina. Usually there's, a favorite or one of the favorites, at least, if not a couple. And then there's another team that was pretty good, but not great, and sort of kind of viewed from the outside as a team that could potentially win the tournament, but was more in the top 12 to 15 realm than, a favorite. So this year we had the crasher of the party, South Carolina. We had the team that was kind of viewed as a potential title contender, but also a fringe title contender in Oregon. And then you had Gonzaga and North Carolina, who were among the favorites to reach the championship game and win it. So it played into that. But this year was better than most years. Saturday was awesome. I mean, those were two really good games. South Carolina played their hearts out. I know that the North Carolina-Oregon game was filled with a lot of mistakes. And one, North Carolina held on to win by offensive rebounding off free throws, which would make any college or any coach rather or any basketball person just miserable, because if there's one offensive rebound that your team should not give up, it's off a free throw. And North Carolina's guys are so good at moving the box out into too deep of a position. You saw it with Tony. There's one really good clip on Monday night in the national championship game that showed you Tony Bradley already pushing his box out, and I want you to know the difference. Moving your box out, as long as you're low and using your butt and your body to move someone, is not a foul. If you're using your arms and elbows and pushing on the top half of the body, or tripping or anything where there's shenanigans going on, you're going to get called usually for a foul. But UNC doesn't get enough credit. Everybody's, it's over the back, it's over the back. And there is a fair amount of it. But over the back, fouls are kind of like holding and offensive holding in football that could get called on every single play. I mean, ultimately, it could get called on every single play, but that doesn't always get called. But anyway, North Carolina does a great job of moving guys underneath the rim and corralling rebounds. And, that's something that they did really well, and that's how they sealed the deal against Oregon. But two really entertaining games and great ratings for the sport and everything. And then we got subjected to a foul fest on Monday night. Now, the foul fest, or let me back up. College basketball set out a couple years ago to deal with what was perceived as a scoring problem based entirely on scoring averages, and they will tell you that scoring is up in recent years. But that is because the rules have been changed to call more freedom of movement fouls, and basically, I mean, that's why the scoring is not so much higher, but why the scoring is higher is because there's more free throws, because there's more fouls being called. To me, that's not necessarily a sign of a good basketball game if there's more scoring, because the scoring is being inflated by stoppages. And I think what we're seeing is two things. One, I think we're seeing inconsistent officiating. It depends on the game. It depends on typically the conference, although I think we saw this a lot in the NCAA tournament where it almost didn't matter who was playing. The officiating is inconsistent with how much it adheres to the new preferred freedom of movement rules and how much it sticks to sort of the old Big East, super, super physical, the basketball that I actually was taught how to play, where, if your guy was making a cut into the lane, you step in front of him and you put your elbow up and you stop him from making that cut. That's a foul now. You're not allowed to do that. When your guy posts you up, you can lean on his back. You could lean on his back. You can't do that now. You could be real physical defending, and you can't do that now, but it's not consistently called. And so what happens is you run into all these different games where they're not called in line with those rules, and so players don't quite know how to adjust. Now the flip side is that players aren't seemingly adjusting to all of it in terms of defending. We saw with Louisville this year where they fouled a lot on defense. They pressed a lot and they were pretty good at defense, but the efficiency numbers that they had were deceiving. They were still rated in the top 10 and stuff, but they were not as good as they have been in years past because they were fouling so much. And obviously fouls change an entire possession for both teams. I mean, they give the opportunity for points if they're in the bonus. And so it changes everything. So that's one. But two, I think we're seeing that college basketball probably needs to change. It needs to change the structure of fouling. I think one, maybe, I don't know if I agree with the 6 fouls instead of 5 that each player gets. But I wonder if maybe we should move in that direction with college basketball, because the fouls are so high. Or do we do something like 3 fouls per half, and when you get 3, you have to sit the rest of the half? I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways to deal with the personal foul thing, but I actually read something that I thought was pretty good on NBC Sports, and I believe it was by Scott Phillips. Yeah, it's by Scott Phillips, who I've met a couple times, really nice guy from NBC Sports, and he actually suggests that the NCAA seriously, this is exact words, it's time that the NCAA seriously examines implementing the experimental rule that they used in this season's postseason NIT that resets team fouls at the 10-minute mark of each half. So basically, turning the game into quarters without doing the quarters. So purists like me do not want to see quarters in men's college basketball. There's just a few things that it's hard for me to stomach. Don't ask me to go into any great detail because I don't have a good answer. I just don't want to see quarters. I'm so used to halves. I like halves. I don't see why we need to change it. But as he says, the compromise could be keep the 20-minute halves but reset the team fouls in the middle of each half. And instead of doing the 1-and-1 and all that stuff, 2 free throws after the 4-foul limit. So in each 10-minute segment, from 20-minute mark to the 10-minute mark in each half, and then 9:59 to 0, if a team commits 4 fouls, the other team shoots 2 free throws. Period. No 1-and-1. Get rid of all that stuff. And as Scott says, it's not going to prevent bad calls from happening. It's not going to stop college basketball players in particular and high school basketball players at a lower level from making silly mistakes and committing stupid fouls, but it does take the game in a different direction. As Scott, I'm paraphrasing what Scott is writing here. It prevents people from watching 10-plus minutes of bonus free throw basketball. I think that's a good step in the right direction, and we'll see. I hope that the NCAA implements something like that because, we see this too much. There are too many free throws, or that game was just unwatchable. I don't know how else to put it. It was hard to watch. Now, because I am such a diehard college basketball fan, and I have been since I was like 3 and old enough to as my dog heard a beep outside and is running downstairs. Might start barking here. This is really what makes this a special podcast, by the way, is the unpredictability of my dog. I refuse to shut the door against my better judgment, and now we are running the potential risk of her flipping out here because a neighbor locked their car and beeped their horn. But anyway, I just think that I love college basketball so much that, of course, I'm going to watch all of this. I'm going to watch the title game. I'm going to watch games. But I do understand why there is a question of watchability. And here's the thing. I cannot stand watching NFL or college football anymore. I can't. Unless I'm covering a game, in which case, I obviously I'm working so I can figure out how to be entertained. Well, not entertained, but I have stuff to do. But if I'm at home, there's so many stoppages that it's impossible to watch. This is why I'm a soccer fan. There aren't any stoppages in games. All they do is dawdle around all this stuff. No. First of all, no, that's just, if you like soccer, you like soccer. If you don't like soccer, you don't like soccer. We don't have to argue about it. I'm just going to tell you why I like soccer, which is that there's constant action for 45 minutes, and then there's a break that is like 10 to 15 minutes tops, and then there's 45 more minutes of constant action. Football, to me, has become so obnoxiously filled with stoppages. Touchdown, extra point. I can't even remember. Do they have a timeout after the touchdowns now? Timeout after the extra point, kickoff, timeout, 4 plays that take up a minute, punt, TV timeout. That's just televised football. Then you throw in the fact that it seems like more and more, I have no numbers. This is literally a feel for me. And I like football, so it pains me to say this, that I don't like watching it anymore. But there's so many injuries because it is such a violent, dangerous sport. There are so many injuries, and their reviews are just obnoxious. They take too long, and there are a lot of them. Now, college basketball has suddenly delved similarly into this territory where, one, they're trying to slim down on the media timeouts because I think they need to, and I'm glad that they're doing that. I wish they would do 4 instead of 5, but I realize that there's money involved in all of this, and that makes it harder to do. The timeouts are incredible. There's so many stoppages there. And then when you throw in now that these replays take forever. And you're sitting at home, and I'm like, why do these guys, and I realize it's almost certainly because there are policies that they have to follow, checklists that they have to follow to make sure that they're making the correct call. And I get that. But God, we're sitting at home, and the first replay on ESPN or CBS clearly shows some guy named Tom knocked the ball out, and it's, San Diego State ball. Okay, make the call. Change it. Okay, let's keep playing basketball, That's what really bothers me, is it takes them forever to look at these reviews. If it means that they have to pay more people to watch these games from a remote location or have a replay monitor on site in front of them, by the time the head ref or whoever gets over to the sideline to see what the review is, there should already be an answer. It shouldn't be on the guys on the court. I just think that should be another thing that'll speed things up. So there's a lot of different things that I think college basketball can do to make it a little bit more watchable. But the bottom line is that some games are going to be bad, and some games are going to be fine, and some games are going to be awesome. That's really the extent of it. And, the problem with replay and how much television coverage all of this gets, as I throw my pen right on top of my highly exceptional recording device, is now officiating has become so scrutinized. People know officials' names. Like, I sat in front of a Butler fan during the Butler Carolina game who had either memorized, he either goes to a lot of college basketball games and knows who the refs are, or he had like memorized their names, which is unbelievable, and was just screaming at them the whole game. He wasn't even watching the game. It was like, "Nah, that's a terrible call, Doug. You know better than that, Doug. J.D. Collins," who is the head of officiating for the NCAA, "is gonna be in your ear about that one, Doug." It's like, dude, shut up and watch the basketball game. Like, watch the basketball game. So I think there's so many different issues here. I do think that officiating is not up to par. It's not consistent. I think that players have not adjusted to the rules well enough in some cases, and coaches. And then I think on top of all of that, we've got a TV problem where there's just so many different things going on that create stoppages, that it's just all around created this culture of, one, incredible intensity and animosity toward referees, as we've seen in the last couple weeks, and two, and we see in college football and pro football too. Like, this isn't just a college basketball thing. This is an NBA as well. I mean, this is across a lot of different sports. And then you throw in all of the different stuff that just like makes these games unwatchable. So unless you're someone like me who is a diehard college basketball fan and will watch any game at any time as long as it's like remotely close, I can understand why there would be some concerns in terms of trying to grow the sport. So let's move on to just a couple items of interest. I have my ACC power rankings set up for 2017-18. Okay? Way too early, obviously. I put these together yesterday, and they need to be updated just slightly in terms of personnel decisions. So I have Duke first, and there's a lot of people who like Carolina, a lot of people who like Louisville, and a lot of people who like Duke. I can see arguments for all three. I have them Duke 1, Louisville 2, Carolina 3. Here's why. Duke and obviously Kentucky in the SEC are the two teams that probably have the highest risk reward for the whole one and done thing and these late decisions in recruiting. So we could go in two directions with Duke. Duke could conceivably have a lineup of Frank Jackson, Luke Kennard, Grayson Allen, Gary Trent Jr., and either Wendell Carter or Marcus Bolden, who's apparently going to return to school. Or they could have a lineup of Trayvon Duval, Gary Trent, Kevin Knox, Wendell Carter, and Mohamed Bamba. Both of those teams are really good, and they're just completely different. So the second one is recruiting heavy, and it does sound like Bamba's probably going to Kentucky. Trayvon Duval, I think, is waiting to see what Jackson and Kennard and Allen do, and then go from there. Kevin Knox, it sounds like, might be actually – people are starting to buzz about him in maybe Missouri, but UNC, I know Kentucky, I think Texas might be involved with him, if I'm not mistaken. Or it might be Florida State is who I'm thinking of. But anyway, so there's a lot of different factors, and obviously, Duke is going to be Duke. So, if they get any semblance of Allen and Jackson or Kennard and Jackson or Allen and Kennard back with Carter and Trent and even Alex O'Connell, who's a really good player coming in, plus, Javin DeLaurier, who I think can help them in some ways. I mean, and Marcus Bolden, we'll see if he can, a full offseason can help him live up to his potential. I mean, that's a really good team. It's a little thin, but very talented. So I was just kind of betting on them having a lot of talent and finishing and starting next season the way they finished this season and not be the messed up jumble that they were. That was very atypical for Duke. That was not something that generally happens with them, and is why I am betting on them to not have a year like they had last year where everything was just constant drama. Louisville I have number 2, and here's why. I think if Donovan Mitchell comes back, I'll probably push them to number 1. The difference between Allen, Kennard, and or Jackson, any semblance of those guys coming back versus Louisville is if Mitchell leaves, you're asking Deng Adele to be consistent, play as well as he did at the end of the season all year, and then Snyder, and then probably VJ King, and maybe a guy like Dwayne Sutton to step in and become super consistent. So, in other words, Duke, those 3 proven commodities would be coming back in this scenario. It's just impossible to bet. So, but here's the thing that I can say definitively about Louisville that I cannot say about really any other team in the conference, with the exception of maybe Virginia Tech, is depth is not a problem at all. I mean, Louisville is loaded. They don't have specific star power. If Donovan Mitchell leaves, they won't have a household name. Not that that really matters. But they won't have superstar power right away. But even if Mitchell leaves, your depth chart at point guard is Snyder and Darius Perry, a top 75 point guard recruit. And then VJ King and Deng Adele and maybe Jordan Nwora and Lance Thomas as your wings, plus Dwayne Sutton, who was a very, very good player, obviously at a lower level at UNC Asheville, but that kid can play. So that's a lot of depth at that spot. And I didn't even mention Ryan McMahon, presumably getting better again, getting stronger, and having more of a role as a shooter, perhaps a ball handler for them. So that's already, I mean, I just named you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. I mean, that's just in their backcourt for 3 positions. So that's a lot of depth. And then the front court is going to be just like it was last year, where Malik Williams steps in and Mango Mathiang leaves. And so you've got Johnson, who I presume will come back, Johnson, Mahmoud, Spalding, and Malik Williams. I've heard, like I said, that Stockman might redshirt next year, so we're not going to include him in this discussion. I don't know how much he would crack the rotation with that group in front of him anyway. But Williams and Mahmoud and Spalding and Johnson, that's a good group. And Williams seems like he is, destined to be a really, really good college player. Ray Spalding, we'll see if he takes a leap forward. Anas Mahmoud got a lot better. Jalen Johnson is a consistent motor guy. So there's a lot to like about this Louisville team. And if nothing else, we know that they're going to be deep. So if Donovan Mitchell does go, I still think Louisville is probably in the top 2 or 3 of the ACC and the top 5 to 8 in the country. But if he does come back, that's the difference to me between a Final Four team and a national championship quality team. And, I guess we'll have to see what that decision is. I tend to think he's leaning toward leaving, but his camp has gotten awfully quiet here. And obviously it's still very early in the process. We'll see if he gets a combine invite and where he stands here in a couple weeks. Louisville does have a pretty good contingency plan in place, and I'm hoping to write about it, like I said. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But even if Mitchell leaves, Louisville is going to be very, very deep. As for the rest, I'm not going to go through the whole conference. I can just tell you right now, LOL at Pittsburgh. Boston College will be better, but it's still Boston College. Clemson, I think their window is closed. They've got some decent players, but I just don't think they're going to make much noise. There's a lot of teams that are kind of waiting to see. Notre Dame with Bonzie Colson, Wake Forest with John Collins. There's a few teams like that are just kind of hoping that guys come back. As far as in terms of, I shouldn't say hoping, but if guys come back, they'll have a lot better teams than if those guys go. Virginia is hard to read because so many people have left. They've had a bunch of transfers. London Parentes is gone, but Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome look like guys who could be stars, et cetera, et cetera. I'll close with my ACC thoughts here. UNC, I think, really needs Tony Bradley to come back, and if he does not come back, they're going to have some issues down low. I think there'll be a team that will be very perimeter heavy with Barry and Pinson and Jalik Felton and Kenny Williams when he's healthy, Brandon Robinson, Seventh Woods. I mean, that's a very good perimeter group, and Andrew Platek, who's a good shooter who's coming in. But then you're asking a couple of freshman big guys and Luke May to be your interior guys, and that's a problem when you're going up against a Louisville team that will be deep in the front court and a Duke team that has at least one big man coming in Wendell Carter. So I think UNC really needs Bradley to come back. If Bradley comes back, then boy, this top four is real good, and I'll tell you why I'm including 4 teams. I love Miami next year. Love them. Newton and Brown pairing with Lonnie Walker, who's a top 20 recruit in that backcourt, is very, very good. And Chris Likes, who's a little 5'6", 5'7" point guard from D.C. I watched him a lot in the ACC circuit. Really, really tough kid, knows how to play. Love watching him. And I got to tell you, he reminds me a lot of Khalid El Amin just because he's tiny. There's nothing else about him. Maybe Levance Fields from Pittsburgh. I don't know a ton more about his game necessarily and how it's progressed since last AAU season as a fire truck steamrolls by here. This is fun, guys. This is what happens when you record in your upstairs office at your house and not a soundproof room at the Courier-Journal. But I like that kid. I like Chris Likes. You get Dejan Vasiljevic coming back as a shooter. And then they've just kind of got a hodgepodge of big guys that I think they're hoping someone will emerge. My guess would be DeJuan Hewell would be the best candidate for that, with Anthony Lawrence being sort of an undersized guy for them, combo forward. And then Dengak, Sam Wardenberg, Ibuka Izundu, and Rodney Miller. There's quite a few options there, but instead of proven commodities, you're asking one of them to take a big leap forward. The backcourt's going to be real good. So those are the 4 top teams in the ACC, in my opinion, coming into this offseason. And obviously there's so much that can change. Graduate transfers, other transfers, recruiting, obviously, as I've said, has a couple things that might change the complexion of these rosters, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see in the coming months, the draft being a big thing for Louisville in particular. As for the way too early top 25s, there's a whole bunch of them. Louisville is ranked, I'm not even kidding you, just about every spot except for 9th, I believe. They are number 1 in the NBC Sports top 25. They're number 2 in Fox Sports. They are number 3 in the ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and Sports Illustrated top 25s. They're number 4 CBS and SB Nation. Number 5 in Bleacher Report. Number 6 in Sporting News. They're number 7 in Yahoo Sports. They're number 8 in the Ken Pomeroy projections. They are not number 9 in any of the polls that I found. And they are number 10 in the USA Today preseason top 25. I think 10's a little low, honestly. But I think anywhere from 1 to probably 5 or 6 is probably fair. I think they're better than some of the teams that are being rated ahead of them. So we'll see. I mean, it's gonna be really interesting where Louisville is put in the preseason poll when the AP and the coaches polls come out in several months. In 6 months from now, a lot can change. And I think Louisville, this is a team that will be very, very confident with this offseason. As you know, they can keep everybody happy. They've got a lot of moving parts, but they're going to be very deep. They're going to be very competitive, and they'll be able to run quite a bit, I would think, this coming season because they're going to have so much depth. The question is, how much do the freshmen and the younger guys learn about Louisville's offense and defensive schemes, and how much does Rick Pitino trust his younger guys. That's going to be a big thing. I mentioned one other thing real quick before we get going here. I did say that I would tell you the Vegas odds, so let me bring it up on my computer. RJ in Vegas is sort of the most popular tweeter of odds out. Obviously, you're going to be shocked by this, but out in Las Vegas, I believe, is where he's located. He is citing odds from the Superbook in Las Vegas via pregame.com. 3 teams are tied for title odds. Very early title odds for the 2018 National Championship. Kentucky, Duke, and Louisville. 3 teams that are often linked together in various ways. By conference, by famous shots, by, I think, Kentucky and Louisville fans. I have seen some who are willing to root for their arch rival because they hate Duke that much. Some. I don't know that that's a majority opinion. So those 3 teams all tied at the hip. So we'll see. And obviously another big part of this is, what does Louisville do as far as scheduling goes as they stare down the NCAA hearing that they're supposed to be having here in the next couple weeks? How do they schedule in anticipation of perhaps a coaching suspension for Rick Pitino? We don't know any of that. So there is some intrigue there, but we'll find out more details about the schedule in the coming days, weeks, and months. And, so a year in review. I think Louisville reached about its potential in the regular season. I think its flaws came to bear in the NCAA tournament, and I think they will enter this offseason far better off emotionally, mentally, and physically than they were a year ago. They'll feel a lot more confident that they're not waiting on people to make big jumps, instead that they know exactly what they have coming back in each player. And if Donovan Mitchell comes back, they know they have one of their stars. If he doesn't come back, they know that they still have a lot of other guys who are pretty reliable, who can step into big roles for their team and kind of keep things going. So into the off season we go, guys. I hope that you enjoyed listening to me ramble for now almost 50 minutes. I apologize for rambling. That is sometimes what I can do really well. Just ask my family and friends. And we will be back next week. So thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.